Hello and good morning. Welcome to another installment of Profiles in Tacticalness. So today, by request, we will be talking about the Warlock. However, not just the Warlock, because this class has gone through names like they're going out of style. Start off as the Mage, then they included the Siren, then he became a Warlock, then she still continued being the Siren up until the remake, in which case she became the Witch. He was still the Warlock at that point. Finally, we had Witch and Warlock. Long story short. Anyhow, the very first iteration of this was actually back in March of the Black Queen with the Mage. Essentially, for your male and female units, the Mage was your first AoE casting mage that you could get, uh, while the female units never actually progressed past the Witch, which was just an AoE stun. So in his case, he had a big ol' AoE from the back row. Once he got upgraded, he got two of those. And then from the front, he started off with two doll attacks, which became three doll attacks, and honestly, there's no reason you'd have him go around hitting things with a doll, because what's that going to do? He's not a very impressive frontline attacker, but from the back, that early AoE is very, very helpful. Actually, up to that point, the only other AoE character that you can get, unless you end up getting, say, something like the Crown on the very first level, would be your leader, who's able to cast an AoE right out the bat. Alright, so, moving on to the second variant, in Ogre Battle 64, this is when we ended up getting introduced to the Siren. So finally, we had a character that was able to do a big old AoE for the ladies there. And, that's really all there is to say about it. She was just a strong caster. By the way, if you're wondering what they ended up looking like in March of the Black Queen, they ended up looking a little bit like this. They were just kind of in the back row here. They did their whole doll thing. Not terribly super amazing or anything. Personally, I always found that in both those games, they ended up pairing a lot better with something like a skeleton, although by and large, they're represented as being protected by golems. This is mostly just because golems make a very effective front line. They may not necessarily be able to hit a whole lot. Their accuracy is pretty piss poor. But skeletons will basically be able to ignore anything that isn't holy, but they will be instantly vaporized by anything that's holy. Anyhow, personally, like I said, I prefer skeletons, but a mix of both, pretty darn effective. And moving right along here. So once we get to the SNES Lettuce Cling together, this is when they started having to change the classes a little bit. So when it came to the Siren, she was actually suddenly the best caster in the game. Yeah, basically up until you got your shamans, I guess second best caster, really. Once you got your shamans, they were going to be a bit stronger, but they were your premier generic supercaster. They got access to the draconic abilities, which were really strong. They could do entire map moves, similar to if you've ever played Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced or Advanced 2. They had the Illusionist. Originally, this was going to be these classes in Let Us Cling Together. So they were very strong, very frail, though, when it came to actually being hit by anything, and they specialized in fans, which weren't terribly plentiful. You still had the Caldia and things like that, but there's really no reason that you wouldn't give them a staff and probably multiple rings of intelligence. Either way, they were entirely a powerhouse caster. Now, once we get to Knight of Lodis, this actually gets a bit more interesting. So for the Warlock, he became more specialized as a hybrid. Namely, they had a specialization for swords, they had a specialization for support abilities, and they actually had an ability that allowed them to hit any enemy with the opposite element added to their melee attack. It damaged them a little bit in the process, but still, they were they were a pretty cool little class there. Unfortunately, they did end up getting a debuff to all their damage. So unfortunately, they weren't a terribly good frontliner. Still, though, they were a fun little gimmick class to work with. If you gave them a Snapdragon, they were pretty absurdly powerful. Actually, there's the funny part is I believe the elemental damage actually stacked. So if you ended up having, say, a Fire Snapdragon, he ended up using their ability on an ice character, or a water character in this case, either or. They ended up doing a fair bit of extra damage in that case. Now, when it came to the Siren, though, they were the exact opposite. They were a dedicated caster. They got access to summons. They, again, specialized in fans. There's really no reason they would have them use fans. I guess the Caldia was a little bit more useful, since you could have them have a staff in one hand and a Caldia in the other. Maybe you could use it as an opportunity to charm somebody, but still, not exactly the best way to go to make them a melee character. Still, though, they were the strongest casters aside from your unique units, and very, very, very strong. Arguably one of the best classes in the game. You needed Philosopher's Stone in both cases. Actually, no, you needed Philosopher's Stone for the Siren, and you needed Pen and the Sword for the Warlock. So it was a nice little kind of split class thing going on there. And alright, this brings us to the PSP remake, and oh no, as per usual, they got a little they got into a little bit of a train wreck when it came to the remake. So first of all, they ended up losing out on the whole hybrid thing. They were both put down to pretty much a slight upgrade over the basic wizard or enchantress. Actually, by and large, their role was kind of that of a sort of evolution of whenever you had somebody in that class, and if you were training a wizard or enchantress up to the point that you actually unlocked this class, you'd be in a position where you could switch them over to this other class, gain a bunch of extra stats by having them re-level that class. They did get pretty decent intelligence growth, but aside from that one-time base stat dump, it wasn't exactly a huge upgrade. So they ended up losing out on engulf, which allowed them to hit targets that are much farther away. They ended up losing out on, I believe, is a conserve MP or a conserve RT, one of those. Either way, they were missing out on a conserve move, and on top of that, well, they were a whole extra thing to deal with. I mean, it was a whole lot of extra steps to actually go through to make this class happen. As far as their abilities were concerned, they again, a lot of their abilities were actually transferred from the wizard or enchantress, so you couldn't actually start somebody here in a practical manner in almost any case. Like, for example, they relied on meditate, but they couldn't gain access to meditate without having to transfer it over first. They oftentimes had to rely on their elemental abilities, which, again, they had to transfer over first. They couldn't actually learn them. They had access to Draconic, but all the Draconic abilities were crazy expensive to use, plus they required a consumable to use, plus were oftentimes absurdly rare to actually find. On top of that, many of those Draconic abilities were, quite frankly, a little bit useless. Like, for example, you have a consumable item from the very start of the game that can give somebody resilience. There's really no reason to go literally diving into the Hell Dungeon to go and get an ability that will allow them to do that for, I think it was like 3 times the actual cost of just buying the consumable item. So it wasn't really worth it. They gained access to a lot of things, like, for example, they were a little bit better with daggers, and this would have been a unique opportunity for them. Basically, if they had the ability to counterattack, even if they had counterattack 1, it would have been a good opportunity for them because upgraded Balder daggers, they only get 3 tiers of daggers. They get the basic ones, they get the Balder ones, and they get the Mask. Aside from Cursed, but everybody gains access to Cursed. So your basic ones, they were just kind of there for practice. You threw them away as soon as Boulder came out. Upgraded Boulder, really good for Palace of the Dead. You can have essentially a mage class that's able to do some pretty significant damage. Again, only against undead. Typically, I preferred keeping Boulder daggers on them because they got a little bit of a casting bonus off of them. And then lastly, you had Damask, and this is where I say it's a little bit of a tragedy that they didn't have at least counterattack 1, because then you would be able to actually have them stand in the front row, equip a buckler and a dagger, and then they might be able to get that stun proc off of an upgraded Damask dagger. It's a bit of a shame, but oh well. So, a lot of extra effort. Their casting abilities are pretty much the same as the Wizard and Enchantress, aside from Draconic stuff, which is very limited in terms of its use. Their equipment is pretty much the same. Overall, they're meant to be an improved caster. Overall, they end up being just a bit of a disappointment across the board. And now we get to the coolest version. As per usual, we're gonna move on to One Vision now. So here we are. So first off, I want to point out they are one of the few classes that gain access to the ability to actually throw items. So innately, they have a lobber built in. So pretty much whatever they can use any items. They have access to field alchemy too, so they get throw item, and it's great. You need to heal this guy over here? Great, do it. Just chuck it over there, suddenly he's healed. It's fantastic. Now, moving on to their actual setups, though, their everything has been expanded. So first off, the question that has come up a few times as far as Draconic Magic, the thing that's supposed to, be their big thing, it's no longer disappointing. So first of all, you gain access to it in stores. Well, your basic attack moves with it, you gain access in stores earlier on. Secondly, all of their attack moves function differently. Tertiary here, you have the fact that they no longer take consumables. They're actually they're a proper magic class now. So, if you're wondering why consumables were an issue, it was a nifty mechanic that they tried to go for. But the problem with having them use consumables is that they maxed out at 99. In a lot of these fights, you end up having fights drag on and on and on and on, and when an ability takes like 8 of them, and you need to have them casting and supporting, and suddenly you're out of worm gems in the middle of the thing, and nothing. You basically have to go all the way back to Palace of the Dead, go all the way down to floor 25, go all the way to the store, buy those worm gems, get out, and go do it again. It was the same problem the Necromancers had. It was really, really annoying. So it limited an already very limited thing that they had. So first of all, you know, you may see here, they got their ability to use swords back from KOL. It's pretty fantastic. So normally you'd probably want to have them use something other than the Matsukaze. I just like having that on here because, well, Knight of Lodis reference. So yes, as far as their abilities, let's take a quick peek here. So weapon-wise, they're a lot more varied. They still gain access to daggers if you want. They get one-handed katanas, they get cudgels, they get whips, they get spell books. Now, all of these are great in different ways. Whips are fantastic because you can have them just attack diagonally if you don't have any casts available. Spell books are actually an indirect attack as well, so you could have them do a short-ranged, ranged attack here. I believe the range is 3 or 4 on these. You get cudgels for your extra intelligence. Personally, I prefer having katanas on them. Basically, katanas allow them to do a little bit of TP damage, so you can have them in the front row. You can have them use their resonance abilities, give everybody a bunch of buffs, and then essentially they can sit in the front row. They can be set up for a pretty decent evasion, and essentially they can go and repeatedly cut down TP bars over and over and over, and go and use their casting abilities to do the actual damage. So they're very good for TP suppression in that way, or either preventing it from being built up. And then daggers if you want binds and/or if you want the spellcraft daggers for debuff users. And alright, so those are pretty darn awesome. As far as their abilities go, they still gain access to their 2 golem abilities. I didn't mention this for the PSP remake because it was so worthless, there was no point in even bringing it up. Because in the original remake, you had Control Golem and Golem's Bane. Okay, that's fine. And I apologize, you actually had the ability to do extra damage to golems as well. Extra damage to golems never came up. Even though you fought golems a fair bit, there was never a reason to use that ability. You had a caster right there who should be able to get rid of them just fine. So, either a caster or somebody with a hammer. Just leave it at that. There was no reason to have somebody specialize in dealing extra damage to golems. So, they still have this here. I should mention golems function differently in One Vision. So, as far as Golem's Bane is concerned, originally, it was either you did no damage or you did a crap ton of damage to golems. Now, they're basically set up where they have much higher resistances to a lot of things, but the ability to actually get extra bonus damage to be dealt with them will scale up properly, so there's actually a reason to use Golem's Bane. Control Golem lets you gain access to pumpkin heads and/or other golems. If you weren't aware, yes, pumpkin heads are considered golems, so you can recruit them bastards, even though they run off of fairy classes. Don't worry about it, it'll make sense. Now, you may notice one thing that isn't here, which is, or rather it's up here, I should mention. So Empower Golem, again, similar to how it used to be, but, again, since they're essentially a caster in the back row, Empower Golem can actually be useful. And you may notice it takes 40 instead of 75, so there's a reasonable possibility that they'll actually be able to empower a golem. In fact, they end up teaming up really well with them, because you could have the golem just sit there and protect them. They maybe can have one of their sides or both of their sides protected by golems. They can let exactly one enemy run through, try to hit them. Maybe they'll get a counterattack on them. That will allow them to potentially build up 40 TP, allow them to pass that on to the golem, who can then proceed to completely wreck face. It's a much better way than it used to be before, because you would never end up building TP up as a warlock or a witch, so it simply wasn't worthless at that point. Now, next, or rather, simply wasn't worth it at that point. Next up, you may notice they can actually learn their elemental abilities. Wow, a magic class that can actually learn magic stuff. Great. Next up, one of my favorite abilities in One Vision, hands down, Mind Blast. So this doesn't do very much damage at all. What it does is it's an active move with a very light penalty that essentially allows you to go and push somebody back one tile while delaying their turn. Now you might be saying, "Hey, that's not terribly impressive." You know what? You know what's really fantastic? Hitting stuff off walls. You know what's even better? Hitting stuff off walls for free. You know what's even better than that? Having the ability to hit two things off of walls. So there's kind of a specific scenario in particular in one of the runs I was doing, wherein there were two guys sitting on ledges. He was standing two tiles away from one of them. Mind blasted one guy off a cliff, ran up to the second guy standing next to him, shield bashed him off a cliff. From a caster class. It's amazing. I love this move. But either way, even if you don't have a cliff to knock somebody off of, the fact that it delays their turn is pretty darn dandy. On top of that, you've got your elemental resonances, essentially a self-centered AoE buff that allows you to do a bunch of extra goodies. You've got reflect damage, absorb MP, you've got your tactician if you need it, as well as your usual kind of stuff up here. They gain access to the full extent of clarity and efficacy. They gain access to parry. Obviously, they're going to have their augments. As you can see right here, this guy, just starting off where he is, starting off with 5 parry at level 1. Yeah, they're pretty great at it. Over here we have, what's it? I'm trying to find where it is on the list here, but we've got counter hit. So they gain access to counter hit 1, so this is 50% in this version. It used to be 25%. But since they get parry and they get counter hit, they are able to be an effective frontliner. They're able to just pretty much do parry damage all day if you really need them to. Or counter damage, I should say. So there's a lot of different builds to go for. All of their skills are going to be all over the place. This one, like I said, this is just going to be a showcase of a crapload of different builds you can do. Personally, I would say it's better to have one of the katanas that give crit damage, but I really wanted to use the Matsukaze on him, so that's fine. But either way, here's what you get. So if you go for one of the side grade katanas, you get a bonus to parry. If you go for one of these, you get a double parry bonus. If you go down here, you get another parry from these helmets, and plus skill on the swords, meaning this guy is going to be very, very good at dodging things. So again, you're essentially having a sword that's not going to crit, but it's going to parry better, and you know, that sort of thing. You have a dragon scale here, which will give bonus damage against dragons. If they hit somebody with it, they can inflict silence. And over here, we've got a falcon feather coat, so we've got extra avoidance, extra health, extra defense, crucible sallet. So we've got agility and we've got mind for both the casting damage bonus and a little bit of extra defense, plus that parry bonus. And yeah, this is what I generally like to run on my warlocks. But moving on. We've got a similar thing over here. This one is going to be trying to use Nomad Gloves to make up for the fact that the Matsukaze doesn't crit. We're still getting all those parry bonuses off all this stuff. However, we're going for Tailwind Robes to try and go for a little bit of extra air augment on this guy. So he's hopefully going to be doing a little bit more damage right out the gate. Then a Seal of Vigor to make up for the fact that he's not using proper armor. Over here we have a sort of magnet build, as it were. So using the Matsukaze with the main gauche, again, still not going to be critting. Don't worry, this isn't a double hitting build. The main gauche is actually a shield. It's a parrying dagger. So they can essentially use this to stab somebody and get a shackle off on them. They get a double parry bonus off that. A Seal of Evasion to get their evasion pretty high up there. Got the Feather Coat, again, to help with evasion. And then the Holy Crown. It's very useful to have Holy Crowns on these guys and or any other type of side-graded magic helmet. Now, you may notice on the bottom right, this lowers their resistance. On top of that, it gives them innate Absorb MP. Bear in mind, if you have the skill Absorb MP on them, both of them will stack, so they potentially can just keep a full MP bar at all times. Because they have lower resistance, the AI will automatically target them for any kind of casting abilities, so you can expect that they're going to end up taking a lot of hits, but they'll be able to recharge themselves off those hits. If, for example, you give them something like a Shard Shield, personally I just wanted to have a main gauche in this guy. I believe we have a Shard Shield build later on here, actually. Yeah, here we go. So if we put a Shard Shield on here, they lose that parry bonus, but what they do have is the ability to essentially constantly do damage off the fact that they're recharging their MP bar. So it's very handy. Personally, I like putting a Seal of Vigor on those kinds of classes because it allows them to withstand physical hits a lot better, so they only have to worry about damage from one particular source. Over here, we've got a sort of tanky, fast build of sorts, with Crucible Greaves giving both physical and magical resistance, Rock Coat for just overall resistance, Shield for overall resistance, and Dagger here just kind of for the hell of it. They're able to bind stuff if they need to, and a Void Ring for just making them faster. So this is just kind of like a general speed type of build. Over here we've got a double knife build hybrid of sorts, essentially going for the extra earth damage off of this, trying to build up extra earth damage, or rather extra earth levels and off of that just off of counters. Reasonably high stats on this one. You can go for a deflect build if you go for leggings, but this is just mostly here for the flavor. So this is a hybrid melee caster of sorts. Probably would be better off with a shield, but I just love using that parrying dagger. Then we've got 3 staff builds here, just to show different ways that you could go about this. So over here we've got the full-on just hybrid build, so the Cursed Chokers. So the Chokers in general in One Vision. They are now more for the sake of boosting a hybrid rather than just being better overall. So if you've got a weapon earring, for example, it'll give them +3 to their skill. So that's more or less like a 15% damage bonus off of that weapon. Whereas with a choker, I believe it's something like about 8 to 10% or so across the board for that particular element. So they're going to be doing a fair bit extra with the staff. They're going to be doing better with everything here. And yeah, pretty solid overall. Then over here we have a Seal of Intellect for the sake of just showing off how that one does. So with the Choker, we're up to 350 casting. With the Intellect, we're at 369, and with Wisdom, we're at about 350. Bear in mind, all of these guys are the same as the Swordmasters I used last time, so none of them are going to be specialized towards casting. Now, over here, Saleh from before, we got the Flame Coat, just, again, kind of mostly for flavor, and then the staff. And alright, so over here we've got all the book builds, as well as a hybrid book build right here. Personally, I like putting a Seal of Fortune on these guys, actually. It allows them to do, those nice little extra crits with their book sometimes if they've got no MP available, which is unlikely if you have them all the way up to where they should be. Either way, I'm going to let them go ahead and run a fight real quick here. Let's continue discussing while looking at this, and I will be back in just a moment. Hello again. Apologize for the momentary silence. Just had to double check something real quick here. But yes, so they should be able to handle these guys, no particular problem. As you can see, their evasion can get really high. Their damage can get really high. It's really only 100% chance hit classes that you have to worry about in a lot of cases. Like I said, evasion builds, just hybriding as casters, are probably my favorite way to do this. But if you have them protected by a front line, you can do a fair bit of cool stuff with them. And again, Mind Blast, really useful delay move, really useful just in general. I love the fact that you can throw stuff off cliffs with it. There's really no reason not to have Mind Blast on everybody. Now, I don't know if the AI will do a good job of showing off said Mind Blast, but still, it's there. I prefer having basic daggers on these guys as opposed to the spellcraft daggers, or rather the spell strike daggers, I should clarify, just because they really have no problems as far as accuracy is concerned. Another nice thing to probably mention here is when it comes to their draconic abilities, they actually scale off of the weapon strength that they end up having at the time. So if you've got something like for example, a sword on them, if you've got a cudgel on them, they're going to end up doing a fair whack of damage out of that. Additionally, the elemental staffs are fantastic on them because they gain access to the ninjas' kind of diet summons, as I like to call them. And because their intelligence is crazy high, they end up doing a lot of damage out those things. As far as support abilities, they've got dang near everything here. And actually, we should probably take a quick moment to browse those over here. So, in no particular order, let's go look at the draconic stuff they get. So they get access to all of their different elemental damages through, all your basic stuff like Rhyme and Rhyme Hue and all of that sort of thing. I give them all a couple of these just because it takes a really long time for them to learn all of them. Over here, we've got Agony, which essentially takes whatever damage they had and transfers it to somebody else. So if they're at critical health, this can be a one-shot on a lot of things. Springboard, which moves somebody over to a nearby tile. Very useful up until you get Teleport. So Teleport is just a flat upgrade to that, really. Just teleports them to somewhere else. Bear in mind that Teleport is a fair bit harder to get. You actually have to go all the way to San Bronza to get it. A lot of these have moved to easier to find areas, like for example Deneb's shop and stuff like that. So something like Teleport, yes, it's still hard to get, but something like Springboard, not so much. So you end up getting them in nicer areas. Soul Harvest, this kills off a TP bar in order to restore health and MP. Like I said, fantastic TP suppression class. Gift of Renewal, this on top of this used to be one of the most worthless abilities because this used to only give Healcraft. So now it gives regen, and on top of that does a little tiny heal to get them started. And then Nullify Strike, which grants Nullify right here, so it basically allows them to pretty much negate a single melee move, just like Hoplites would be able to do with their skills normally. As far as their regular elemental abilities, they get access to all of the indirect ones right here. So, for example, like with Ice, they get Avalanche, Avalanche 2, Avalanche 3, but they wouldn't gain access to all of the direct missile moves. They get Solidify, they get most of the high and low tier buffs. Actually, I believe they get all of them. So like right here, they reset TP in an area to 0. Right here, stops a single target, battering ram to somebody, resilient to a guy. If we go to some of these other ones here, like with water, they can use Water Walk, they can heal in an area and cure poison. They can use Poison Mist, which does damage now. They can use Sludge Bind, which does, I believe, a little bit of damage and delays RT. If we go over to Lightning here, this is one of the awesome ones too. Oh, sorry. Suddenly lawnmower. All right, whatever. Moving on. So right here we have a RT resetting move. So this just basically resets their turn. We get stun in an area. We get a ability to raise TP of a class or any other units nearby in an area. I believe. I forget if it's in an area or not. Actually, no. I think it's a single target. And then we get True Strike in an area. I mean, they've got everything. Whatever you want them to do, odds are there is some element that will be able to let them do that. Wind, for example, lets them cast Hover, so Hover is no longer a thing. Oh, jeez. Lawnmower's coming for another pass! Anyway, like something like Hover, for example, is available from Wind Mages far earlier on. Now you don't have to go all the way up until I think it was right before Palace of the Dead to be able to get a ring that lets somebody hover. So, again, pretty much everything. They gain access to pretty much everything. There's actually a really good reason to use both these guys and wizards and or enchantresses. They're no longer like just straight upgrades to each other and or not worth it upgrades, as it were. Because for all intents and purposes, they function entirely different. Your regular mage classes there, your wizard and your enchantress, they're there for the sake of using missile abilities. They get a lot of extra range. So, for example, they can use Extend, allows them to use moves from really far away, whereas these guys, their range is a fair bit shorter, but they gain access to more of the buffs and debuffs. They're there as a support hybrid of sorts. So very useful for a lot of situations. Very good, just kind of general purpose thing. Like if you know you're going to be on a big map, then you would probably go for a wizard or an enchantress. If you're on a smaller map, and or if you know you're going to be holding formations a bit more, then something like the warlock and witch are what you want to end up going for. If you, for example, needed a hybrid, like let's say hybrid sniper caster slash undead character, you would end up going for a necromancer. If you ended up needing a if you ended up needing just like a straight up supercaster, and weren't too worried about the speed, you had the Lich. I mean, all the classes actually have a purpose now. It's no longer like, ooh, look, this is a nifty new class. Oh, look, it got some new abilities and it lost a bunch of its old ones, and every new mage is a downgrade. It's you know, every class has a purpose. You actually might see cases where you had a warlock, necromancer, wizard, and lich all on the same team. It's no longer just shamans beat everybody. But anyway, I think we pretty well covered what this class can do. I apologize for the few little disruptions in this one, but life will happen. And all right, hope this was entertaining. Hopefully, this is something that you like. And if you'd like to see more, obviously there's that whole subscribe-y dealy. That always helps. It's a good little motivator. And all right, so you have a good one, and I will see you next time.